Hello, once again, I'm Michael Saxon. This video supports my website, lastpost.net. Over the last 50 years, the West has been hemorrhaging its values and coherence under the dual influence of what I call the two giants, Western liberalism, which is nothing more than a resurgent fascism, and global corporatism, which is simply a new feudal order, which has hijacked and subverted true free market capitalism. The global corporate elites in business and banking are the new aristocracy, interested only in maximising their own wealth and power at the expense of genuine democracy and human freedoms. The Western Church is the only institution with the ability and the historic Judeo-Christian mandate to save the West from itself, providing it's part of a concurrent process of rebuilding the Western Church, which is tracked down at about the same rate as Western societies under the hegemony of liberalism and corporatism. Christianity's precepts, its big ideas and principles, are universally good for human societies. We know that because the societies that embraced Christianity surged way ahead of the rest of the world in technological progress and the sophistication of its learning, its institutions, and commitment to justice and human rights. Well, that was until about the 1960s. It's been a bit of a slalom ride downhill since then. At the heart of the Next Generation Church, or NGC strategy, I advocate in my book of the same name and on lastpost.net, are a set of 12 reforms, which I insist are the only way to break free from the stranglehold of the two giants. They all reflect 5 core Christian worldview principles. I have a matrix-style table in NGC, my third book, where I cross-link the 5 principles with the 12 reforms. I'm not going to go through the reforms here. I would rather you went to the website and the books available for free off lastpost.net. Instead, I'm going to cover 17 reasons why the 12 reforms are central to the NGC strategy. I've listed them here. There's 15 here. 2 more are embedded in the ones that are already up there. But before I go there, let's get something crystal clear. You may not agree with all of the reforms on some form of ideological ground, but they are not ideological or politically generated. They were selected for their utility in bringing down the two giants opposed to the will and purposes of God. To take an ideological stand against any of them is to simply turn them from an outreach church building strategy into a political debate. That would be a tragedy. If you find yourself doing that, you've missed the whole point entirely. There is no room for secularized political partisanship in God's economy. One more observation before we move on. If the first 2 reforms were ever adopted, even without some of the others, it is almost certain the others would enter the mix anyway, because the first 2 reforms would empower ordinary people with the ability to influence national and local policy making through citizens-initiated referenda, the Swiss system of direct democracy. All of the 12 reforms are nascent issues, just waiting for the right time to leap into the public square. Reform 1 in particular would allow that to happen. Right, from there, let's now cover the reasons the 12 reforms are so necessary from a Christian church perspective, bearing in mind we're not even addressing how the reforms would work together to propel the West well past the social and political corruption threatening it at present. So number 1, they provide an enabling strategy for churches to reassert their historic role in the public square as the prophetic conscience and moral leader in society by breaking the wilderness addiction to pietism and social service alone. They would galvanize Christians around a big cause architecture that should transcend limited vision and institutional church divisions, because they are not an end in themselves, but a transformative vehicle for opening up far wider opportunities to engage communities with the gospel. The gospel brings both salvation and an openness to honour God's commands across the full spectrum of social activity. They are a natural extension of the situation analysis I cover extensively in my books, and therefore mesh with reality. They make the church as counterculturally transformative as the first century apostolic church was. All 12 collectively give expression to the Christian worldview's 5 core Christian worldview principles. They align the church with God in standing against all the things God says he hates. I refer to that in other videos, and it's an important component of the next generation church strategy. They transcend political interests and biases inside the church because they do not side with any party political position and can be supported by all Christians because they target the atheistic and materialistic creeds aligned through liberalism and corporatism against God. They avoid the West's left-wing PC brown shirts by attacking the core dogmas of liberalism and corporatism, rather than the more obvious trigger PC issues used as blowback to discredit people and cloud the real issues. The first 2 reforms concern democracy itself. If introduced, they would allow the church to relitigate the big moral issues without transgressing the separation of church and state convention. They are enablers for both the Great Commission and the Great Command. There is no love for our neighbour in a Western church that does nothing to stop the slide into increasing social and economic dysfunction, statism and oppression that will eventually lead back to full-scale paganism. A more engaged church in this regard is a church with more opportunities for evangelism and discipleship. The first 8 of the 12 reforms would destroy liberalism's dominance, while the last 4 would take corporatism apart. Metaphorically speaking, they would carry the church out of its self-imposed wilderness and back across the Jordan to confront God's enemies, the giants. They are an accurate, forensic and compassionate response to our times. If implemented, they would provide a powerful counter to those perverse drivers in mankind's nature. The will to power, what the Germans call the Führerprinzip, the normalcy bias, vacant expectation, groupthink, and the Toynbee effect. All of these are covered quite extensively in my books. They act as a vehicle for countercultural transformation. They are neither judgmental, pharisaical, pride-driven, or politically partisan. They are a compassionate and passionate, inclusive and far-sighted vision for nations to recognise each human is made in God's image and deserves every opportunity to achieve the opportunity latent in the gifts God has bestowed on each of us. They would re-engage secular society with the existence of God, the veracity of the Bible, and the importance of the gospel. They would, in other words, confront society with these things. Christians would have to be on their mettle, ready to defend the faith, Jude 3. Bring down the pretentious arguments raised up against the knowledge of God, 2 Corinthians 10:5. Do the important things, a la Jesus' injunction in Matthew 23:23. Give reasons for their faith, from 1 Peter 3:15, and of course present the gospel. Finally, they provide biblically founded answers to the major impending issues facing Western societies, like the impact, for example, of artificial intelligence and an aging population. So, the 12 reforms, if prosecuted with sufficient vigour over the medium term, using all the avenues now available, will vastly expand opportunities for the Western Church to perform its most important function, bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ to as many people as possible. Please explore lastpost.net and download the books. Issachar's Call was my first book. It is written as a resource text for Christians looking to understand our times and find out what to do about it. The second book, Against Our Night, should appeal to both Christians and particularly non-Christians. It condenses much of the material in Issachar's call and also introduces the 12 reforms. The third book, much shorter book, NGC, introduces Christians to the NGC strategy. All the materials needed for a one-day workshop on the strategy are also available by contact me directly off the site.